Now, I will be very brief in my presentation and leave the rest to discussions. Now, 44 years back, when I joined St. Xavier's College, Calcutta, and took my honors in political science, the first thing I learned about political science was that it dealt with resolution of conflicts. Little did I know that after nearly 3 decades, I would become an university professor and I would be required to teach a semester conflict resolution and peace studies. And that paper I am teaching now. And Mahatma Gandhi is one on whom there has been an enormous proliferation of literature. He has his admirers, he also has his detractors. But the point is that the interest in Gandhi has not diminished even an iota. So, I would like to explore how far the Gandhian paradigm of dialogue can be used as a strategy for conflict resolution in a world. Next slide, you want to move? Yeah. Use the arrows. So now, in this world of challenge, to use the words of Rabindranath Tagore, ruthless conflict, it's a world maddened with violence where ruthless conflict occurs every day, devious are its ways, and greed holds its sway. Now, certain conflicts appear to be intractable. That is the phraseology used in the literature of peace and conflict studies. But what are intractable conflicts? Intractable conflicts are those who seem to be never-ending, that they will go on and on and on, interminably. Now, after the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, people are thinking that after all, both these conflicts seem to be intractable, but ultimately did not prove to be so. So, is any conflict intractable? Let us not go into that. But some conflicts are there which appear to be intractable. One is, of course, the Kashmir problem between India and Pakistan. I am not sure whether I will see the resolution of that conflict in my lifetime. Maybe in my next life I will see it. The second one, it has been very much in the news a few days back when Hamas fired the first shots, and you know Israel reaction came, and now the Middle East is simply boiling, as you know. That is another instance of what we call intractable conflict, since it's been going on for quite a long time. Now, let us first of all be very clear in our minds about one. Let us disabuse our mind of any conception that there can be absolute peace. Peace can never be absolute. Peace is always relative. So let us also not have any extravagant expectations from the Gandhian model, because Gandhian model can also not guarantee perpetual peace. What it can at most guarantee is moderately durable peace. And absolute non-violence is a myth. I'll tell you a very interesting anecdote here. When Hitler started his Blitzkrieg and France collapsed, Belgium collapsed, Holland collapsed, England was trembling, ultimately England was able to hold on, but that's a different story. When Hitler launched his onslaught and Europe was simply tottering on the brink of the precipice, Lord Linlithgow was the Viceroy of India. Gandhi paid a visit to him in his house. And Gandhi said, Lord Linlithgow, if Hitler enters the streets of London, you welcome him. And Linlithgow simply got flabbergasted. What the hell is he saying? You ask Hitler, come, occupy London, occupy all our houses, come and sit in the parliament, the city is yours. You will be thinking as if you are surrendering to Hitler, but you are not surrendering your soul to him, you are not surrendering his spirit to him. Now, I don't know whether the doctor was standing there, he would have been able to testify whether Lord Linlithgow's blood pressure went up after hearing this from Gandhi, but this much is on record that it was customary on the part of the Viceroy to escort a visitor of eminence to the doorstep when he was taking leave of him. But Lithgow was so dumbfounded that when Gandhi was taking leave of him, he could not just escort him to the door. So absolute nonviolence is simply a myth even today. Not only in those days, even today, absolute nonviolence is just a myth. Now, I have deliberately skipped the previous slide. Yes, these were the sources of inspiration for Mahatma Gandhi, both Occidental and Orient. Now, can dialogue serve as a prologue to conflict resolution? Now, this is something, it's a recurring theme of almost all discourses on peace and conflict, that all conflicts can be resolved through dialogue. Now, I am not contesting this. Why should I? But the point is that we should not reduce dialogue to a kind of a cliche, because my point is that dialogue by itself is not sufficient to resolve conflicts. It's the spirit in which dialogue is conducted. And dialogue is always situation specific. A particular kind of dialogue will help in a particular situation. A different kind of dialogue will help in another situation. But dialogue cannot be universalized. Dialogue is always relative. But what we find is that much of the literature on peace and conflict studies is suffused with the Gandhian spirit. And I have one point where I have quoted Gabriela Bloom in her work, Islands of Agreement, that even in extreme conflictual cases, 5% area of accommodation can be identified. That means even enemies can carve out a limited space for coexistence. Thus, even in the midst of poison, some nectar can also be found. Now, when dialogue is conducted in the Gandhian spirit, the ambience can be competitive, because competition is everywhere. Life itself is competitive. But the style should be cooperative. Competition can be constructive. Competition is negative when it is unregulated. That is my point. So there can be both constructive competition as well as destructive competition. It is the relational structure which is very important, and I think Gandhian spirit or the Gandhian paradigm ensures against overturning the relational structure. The relationship has to remain intact. Now, as a prologue to conflict resolution, I think as a prologue to conflict resolution, dialogue can serve a useful purpose. There will be effective communication, and you have to always listen to the other man's viewpoint. That is very important. Now let me tell you one thing. Today is 21st October. And on this day, one of India's leading patriots, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, inaugurated the first provincial government for India in East Asia. It was he who addressed Mahatma Gandhi as the father of the nation. You must all be knowing that there were differences between Gandhi and Subhash, but Subhash never allowed the differences to sort of degenerate to a narrow personal level. And the feeling was mutual also from the point of view of Mahatma Gandhi. I did not go deeper into this now. So you have to listen to the other man's viewpoint. And it's an appropriate dialogue where there is a mutual acceptance of ideas, where you're always receptive to the other man's viewpoint. It is this where the Gandhian spirit is best unfolded. Now, in the Harvard School approach to conflict resolution, we find the focus is on interest rather than on emotion. Supposing the opponent is very angry with you. Now, if you retaliate with anger, in response to anger, does it solve the problem? It does not. You have to understand the source of the anger. And very often you know when there is a lot of bitterness, pent-up feelings come out. But in a sense, it's all right. If you just brood over your unhappy experiences, that's something even worse. That will not take the dialogue forward. Let the pent-up feelings burst out. You will feel relaxed. So when somebody sort of swears at you on the negotiation table, better to tell him, calm down. You think you are attacking me. You are not attacking me. You are attacking the problem. It is the issue and not the individual which is the target here. This is called conflict transformation and active listening to the other party. Even when you don't agree, if you listen actively and attentively, it means that you are giving due importance to the other man's viewpoint, and that satisfies ego. Some ego of the other party. And there are symbolic gestures like apology. Apology doesn't mean going and falling into somebody's feet. These are symbolic gestures. Okay, sorry, if something has happened in the heat of the moment, I apologize for the same. That is the spirit. Okay. But here is a big but. Supposing you go on making your gestures and overtures all the time, and your opponent tries to use your goodness as weakness, then what will happen? Well, Mahatma Gandhi never compromised on this question. He was never an adherent of cowardice. So in that sense, in such situations, you have to resort to non-violent psychological warfare. Just tell the opponent, well, since you are trying to swear at me all the time, put it in writing. Whenever you say this, the opponent will be under pressure. Nobody normally wants to put down something in writing because that becomes a public document. This is called psychological pressure. Now we have talked about prologue. Can the dialogue lead us to epilogue? Now here I would like to tell you that I am talking about not about any ideal dialogue, but rather about dialogue that is possible and practical. Just as Plato had talked about the ideal state, but Aristotle talked about the best practicable state. Similarly here, dialogue in my opinion is not ideal, it is practicable and possible. Actually, what is needed is mutual goodwill and reciprocal commitment to peace. Now, when I talk about the Gandhian dialogic alternative, what I mean is that it should be pacifist, transformative, sublimating. Sublimating means you are sublimating your own ego. If you can sublimate your ego, it will also sublimate the ego of the opponent. It should be persuasive and above all, it should be democratic. And the language is very vital. Verbal language is very vital. It creates friends, it also creates enemies, it creates amity, it creates enmity. Silence also can be a communicator of both violence and non-violence. I will tell you a very humorous story here as I'm about to end my presentation. When silence is constructive, it takes the dialogue forward. But silence also can be destructive. There were two houses separated by a boundary wall. One day, the inhabitants of one house heard a lady of the other house screaming at the top of her voice, and the target of her attack was her daughter-in-law. So the mother-in-law was swearing at the daughter-in-law. But every moment the pitch of the mother-in-law's voice was going up, but not a word was being heard from the other side. So these people got a little bit, I would say, a little bit surprised. And so if the daughter-in-law does not reply, does not retaliate, so why should the mother-in-law go on shouting more and more and more? So this is a mystery. So one of them just went to the boundary wall and just peeked over it and saw that the daughter-in-law was cleaning the floor of the courtyard with a broomstick. And the mother-in-law for some reason had reprimanded the daughter-in-law. She was just keeping her lips sealed, her mouth shut. She was just picking up the broomstick like this and pointing it at her mother-in-law like this. That look, this is what is in store for you, I'm going to hit you. But not a word escaped her mouth. So silence can be very destructive also. Supposing on the negotiating table, you don't say anything verbally, but you make faces and all sorts of gesticulation, that antagonizes the opponent. So actually, the Indian philosophy, there is something called Shabda Brahma. It's a psychic wave which generates vibration. And verbal speech has a creative power of its own. So when you speak, your words should convey your innermost feelings in a positive manner. Just as Gandhi was called father of the nation by Subhash Chandra Bose, Johann Galtung has been called the father of peace research. It was he who articulated the idea of positive and negative peace. He founded the Transcend International, which is a global network for peace, development and environment, dedicated to bringing about a less violent world through conflict restoration and mediation. And believe it or not, in more than 150 conflicts, Galtung has been invited to mediate. And he has always tried to dialogue with all the parties separately. And he has tried to bridge the gap between legitimate and illegitimate goals. Once you do that, conflict resolution becomes much easier. And in one situation, Galtung intervened very successfully when there was a conflict between Denmark and the Muslim world over a cartoon on Prophet Muhammad. If I am not mistaken, you will be able to tell me it was, I think, sometime in 2005, where a cartoon was published on Hazrat Muhammad, and that was not very, I would say, that cartoon was not very honorable, and the Muslim world was absolutely furious over it. And the Prime Minister of Denmark was reluctant to have a dialogue. Galtung said, why? Why not have a dialogue? And he ultimately facilitated the dialogue, and the intervention solved the problem. Finally, look at the terrorists. Look at the jihadis. Look at Hamas. Now, can Gandhian dialogue or counseling in the Gandhian spirit melt the heart of the terrorists? Gandhi perhaps wanted to melt the heart of Hitler. Aurobindo Ghosh, one of the leaders of our revolutionary movement, who later on became I would say, a spiritual meditator, a recluse in Pondicherry. He said that if Gandhi wants to melt the heart of Hitler, it will need a furnace. Now, is it the same case with the terrorists? Now, according to two experts, there are three categories. First is the medulla. The medulla comprises of those terrorists who are hardcore. Look at Hamas, look at the jihadis, right? Now, they have no feeling of guilt and they have no reality function. The cortex is the second category, which comprises some romantic idealists. They are not so hardcore. They are susceptible to feelings of guilt and self-doubt. Not that there's not to reason why, there's but to do or die. No, that is for the medulla. And the epicortex then just consists of some people who are emotional, impulsive, who just join the terrorist groups to find some meaning in their otherwise shallow existence. Now, Gandhian dialogue can definitely be of great use to induce the cortex category to return to the mainstream. And in many cases we find militants after joining, young people after joining a militant group want to return to the mainstream as they are frustrated or disillusioned with their life in the military camps. But can the medulla people be converted in this way? Now that is the point with which I will end. You see, it is a great challenge because they are hardcore. And I think you have to make a dent into their inner world of convictions. You have to provide an inner world kind of a counter brainwashing. They have already been brainwashed. Now you have to counter brainwash them. Now whether that can be done through a Gandhian dialogue, I'm not very sure, but it's an interesting experiment. This Azmal Qasr, who was convicted in the attack on the Taj Hotel in Mumbai, he was made to read the Urdu translation of Gandhi's story of my experience with truth. But no trace of repentance was found in him. But look at Yasin Malik, chairman of JKLM. He pleaded before the Delhi court that he had given up violence and adopted Gandhi's path of non-violence. So can we sort of crack the hard nuts? Here, as I end my presentation, I posit my idea of a psychic dialogue. No, I am not relating to any religious counseling. I am not advocating anything like that. But we find that in Kashmir, there is a generation which is taking to the ideals of Gandhi, called Gandhigiri, and they are denouncing their arms. Mr. Kofi Annan, the Secretary General, the previous Secretary General of the United Nations, said, we have to win the heart and mind of the terrorists. So actually, by psychic dialogue, what I mean is, dialogue based on some principles and values, where you have to penetrate not the outer world, but the inner world of the terrorists, and confront them with an alternative view based on a different value system. I think it is difficult, I wouldn't say impossible. We cannot expect for any dramatic success, but at least we can reach the tip of the iceberg. I end by saying that dialogue should always have a human element in it. As poet Swinburne had stated, truth only is living, truth only is whole, and the love of its giving, man's pole star and pole, man the pulse of my center, fruit of my body, and seed of my soul. Thank you.